Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Sonita. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. My name's Ursula, and I'm going to be asking the questions tonight. And I'm very proud to say that Sonita is my colleague. We've been working together, and as you can tell, she's just made a deeply, for me, very emotional film, very searing film, a film that makes me feel so many emotions all at the same time. And so we're just going to talk together and try and unpick some of the reasons behind making this film and why it's been so important to Sonita. So I just want to ask you, Sonita, I know that this is a really personal film for you. So how did it all start, and what does it mean to you to have made this film?
Yeah, I guess had it not been for the pandemic, I would never have directed a film. And I think the pandemic has been so challenging and so difficult for so many people. And I think for me, when the pandemic happened, I started to really reflect on my childhood and reflect to my childhood and to my parents who are no longer here and no longer with us right now. And that reflection took me to my childhood. When lockdown happened, we were all reliant on our local communities, reliant on local businesses, reliant on those very people that kept society moving along, like the NHS workers, the factory workers, the taxi drivers, the local corner shop. And my parents worked in a factory. My parents ran a corner shop. And when the pandemic struck, I really started to think about them deeply and think about everything that they did for me and the opportunities they gave for me, the life they gave up for me, and the journey they made to get here. So I felt this deep sense of urgency and a real need and desire to go out and to film migrant communities that were keeping society moving. So their story was my inspiration and my starting point to make the film.
And
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about their story, because I know your mom is in the film,
yeah.
and it's a very moving interview. And you know the reasons behind you doing that interview are interesting in itself. What is what are your parents? What is the story of your parents coming to this country, and in particular your mom?
Yeah, so my parents met in India. My mom was a survivor of partition, so she lived in Lahore up until 1947 when she was 12 years old. And at that point in August, she had to leave very quickly. They lived in Lahore, they had a business. She had a brother, she had a sister. She had a couple of sisters actually, and a brother. And they one day they were living a normal life in Lahore, and the next day they had to leave very quickly. So my mom's journey was about 180 kilometers from what was old India to new India, and she walked for 16 consecutive days. So her journey during that time changed her life forever. I mean, she went from having a house to living in a mud hut, and her harrowing experience really gave her the motivation to have that hard work ethic, to have that belief that there is a better life out there for her children, for her family, to better her life. So she and my father met in India, and he came here first. He couldn't afford to bring my mother. So when he arrived in England in the early 50s, they didn't have anything. So he unfortunately slept on the streets for a couple of nights. He actually met an English man that took him in and gave him a job. And he eventually got work. He got onto he got a job. He just started making a life for himself and was able to get some money together to send for my mum. So she was in India whilst he was here. And then when he sent for her, they had children straight away. They both worked as manual workers. My dad then saved up enough money to set up a corner shop. And so his business in a little town called Bilston in the West Midlands was really the hub of the community, you know. But my father unfortunately died when I was 5, leaving my mother to be a single parent to 10 children. And I think that experience of not having a father and having a single mum that couldn't speak English very well, that struggled. She really struggled. She struggled financially. She struggled with her mental health, and she had lost the love of her life. And that was a struggle, being a child in that environment. But it taught me a lot of gratitude, and a lot of. I felt a deep sense of love and respect and admiration for my mother, because here she was, a lady that had given up so much for me, and to be a single mom and to raise 10 kids was just phenomenal.
So, you understood incredibly directly, being the child of migrants, people who came to this country, and obviously worked incredibly hard. To run a corner shop is an extremely, you're working kind of 24/7 often, 7 days a week. And I guess that hard work ethic, I know, was instilled in you. So, just going to the film, you have all these contributors, the participants in the film, who come from all over the world, who are students, who are working, who came in with the Windrush generation, people who are running a community kitchen. It's an incredibly diverse range of people doing different things from different parts of the country. So what was your starting point? How did you set out to find those people? Who was the first person that you found? And
yeah, that's a really good question, because there's a lot happening in the film and there's a lot of thoughts there. My starting point really was Daksha. When I went out,
who Daksha is?
Daksha and Paresh run the community response kitchen. They're the couple that run the community response kitchen. So because my film started off as a film about how migrants were keeping society going through a global pandemic, I found Daksha and Paresh, and it was just in the local Brent newspaper, and it was an article about them feeding, all different types of communities during the lockdown. So my starting point was her, and when I started filming her and getting into her world and what her food kitchen was doing, her world exposed me to the bigger story of no recourse to public funds, the hostile environment, the students. The student story led me on to looking up, what NRPF was about, and that led me to Farouk. And the so-called highly skilled migrant story led me on to the Windrush scandal. So every contributor almost led me to the next contributor. As I was filming, my story was evolving, and I just had to keep going. And I think it was pretty crazy, to be honest, because I started off making a completely different film, and as I'm filming, I'm learning about something that I was completely I wasn't unaware of it, but I didn't have the knowledge of it that I have today. And I think that was a really a brilliant journey for me, really, in a way, because it exposed me to a subject that I wasn't really familiar with in great detail. And my participants gave me that access and that entry into that knowledge, which I'm totally grateful for.
Yeah, no, I certainly, I didn't know the term, quite shockingly. I didn't know that term, no recourse to public funds. And, when you see it through the eyes of the students, for example, it's completely heartbreaking. We could talk about economics a lot and how, the economic benefit that migrants bring to any country that they move to, working hard, paying taxes, just like your parents. The idea that students come here and pay an awful lot of money for their education and then are just, dumped is heartbreaking and also completely crazy. And I wondered, I think it's a film that leaves me with lots of different emotions, amongst which is anger. Actually, to be honest, I feel incredibly angry and quite devastated by some of the situations that you portray. And I just wondered, for you, was there something like, there was obviously the story of your parents and your mum, but was there what kind of fueled you through this? Because I can imagine making a film like this in COVID was, not easy. So kind of what kept you going?
I guess it was familiarity of the participants. Farouk could be my brother, Anthony could be my uncle, Daksha and Paresh could be family members, my mum and dad even, and the students could be my nephew and nieces. I mean, it was at one point, I felt like I was filming my family. And I guess the reason why I felt that was because growing up, that was my community. The corner shop that my dad had was really responsible for the Black and Asian communities in the West Midlands. You know, he would take care of the heavily Jamaican community that was local to us, and the Sikh, Hindu, and Muslim community, the white working class community. So there was a huge familiarity with the participants, and what kept me going was them, and what kept me going was, I have to tell this story. I need to tell this story, and I have to do it for them. And that continues to drive me today. And it's driven me throughout the whole of the production, the post-production, and now the life of the film, which is now with distribution. So I think it was really their stories and the familiarity to their stories that kept me going, and the importance of their stories. And the pain that they were going through and the struggles. You know, I saw things off camera, and I talked to them about stuff that was really heartbreaking. And, you know, and when you see that and you experience it, and it's really tough. It's really tough, you know, and I found moments of myself feeling this is hard, but I have to do it. I have to keep going for them. And that's what I did. And we continue to do that.
And also, I was interested in knowing whether, you know, have the participants, all of them, have they watched the film? And what did they think, you know, seeing their lives in that very raw way on screen? And, you know, and what's happened to them, particularly the students?
Yeah, sure. Well, Daksha and Paresh and Farouk have seen the film. They came to the premiere, which was great. And for them, I think there is a huge level of sadness because things are not great for Farouk. Farouk is more in debt. His indefinite leave to remain has been rejected. He has now just paid £12,500 for yet another renewal that may not go through. And he's struggling, even though he's working right now. He's just really struggling with his mental health. Daksha and Paresh, again, a great sense of loss that they weren't able to continue the kitchen, that they know that there are people out there struggling, that they feel like they're letting down. So after they saw the film, there was an emotional, it was emotional for them to revisit what had happened to them, but also to know that they haven't moved on. And for the students, unfortunately, they're in a really precarious position. Our particular students in the film remained incognito because they were in a very precarious position then. And unfortunately now their situation hasn't improved. It's got a lot worse. One of the students is deported, has gone home. The other student he's not studying and is out of work. And so it's really tricky. Other students have come to see the film and they are very angry that this is still happening. They are very angry that there hasn't been any level of compensation or any means of, well, you know, we know you're struggling, so let's help you with your fees, or let's help you with your accommodation, or, you know, let's pay off those debts, you know. So there's a lot of anger coming from the students right now. And with Anthony, unfortunately, Anthony was supposed to be at the premiere. He was also supposed to be at Cambridge Film Festival, but unfortunately his mum and his son both died within the same week. So he has had a really tough time with grief, but also still fighting for compensation. And he's also struggling with his mental health. He's also in a really tough situation right now. So we're in contact. I'm in contact with everybody, and they know I'm there for them, and they are there for us for the film, and they want to support the film. But their situations are a lot worse than what they were when we filmed Hostile.
Well, that's, I mean, devastating to know. And obviously, like you say, many people have suffered in the pandemic, but I think particularly people with precarious domestic, you know, residential work situations. And I think the mental health, I'm really glad you bring that up, because I think the mental health issues. You can see that with the Windrush guy, you know, is long term. And so, I mean, they are angry. You know, I think people watching this film are angry. Where, you know, where does it go from there? I'm sure a lot of people watching might think, well, okay, you know, what can I do? How can we change this situation? What do you think the film can do? Is there a role for the film? Does it have an impact strategy whereby, you know, people, I mean, I would like Theresa May and Amber Rudd to see this film. I think it was Theresa May who coined the phrase, wasn't it? The hostile environment. I would love those people to see this film. I would love many MPs to see this film, but also, you know, people who are not in Parliament, but people who are perhaps teachers. And so you know, it's going to go to festivals, I know, and it's fantastic. It's going to have a theatrical release. Where else do you want this film to get out there into the world that might change some, you know, hearts, and certainly hearts, but minds as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would like this film to have impact. And I guess you're right, we have a theatrical release, which we're really proud of. It's going to be released from the 21st of January. And for 3 months, it will be around the UK, mainly in London. So watch out for our social media on that. But in terms of the impact, we're in contact with MPs, both from the Conservative Party and Labour, who are both supporting a Parliament screening. So we're hoping to have this film, our end game is to have it in Parliament with ministers, you know, from MPs from the left and the right, all discussing this topic around the hostile environment. As we can see with the latest Nationality and Borders Bill, MPs from both sides have come forward, raged with this bill. So we have this feeling right now that this isn't about a party, this is about a system that's affecting individuals. So we're really hoping to bring together MPs from both the left and the right. In terms of our impact campaign, we have a number of organisations on board that deal with migrant rights, like JCWI, Migrants Organise, and they are Praxis, they're really NRPF network, they're really helping us with screenings in the new year. So we'll be going into their organisations with their network of individuals, we'll be screening the film to them. They will then use the film as a toolkit to really bring this narrative and this story to the forefront. So we have our organisations, we're hoping to go to Parliament, but we're also working with grassroots organisations, people on the ground who are working with communities that are suffering from the hostile environment and no recourse to public funds. So I'll be going into different communities across the country and speaking within localised community centres and meeting people who are directly affected by NRPF. So we're aiming to do an impact campaign that starts off with just everyday normal people who weren't aware of this subject matter, to really start a dialogue around the hostile environment and the effects that it has on an everyday people, and then to grassroots organisations, to organisations, and then to Parliament. And hopefully Liberty, the UN, you know, we really want to see how far we can push this. But it is about trying to raise awareness about this cruel policy and legislation, and then also trying to change policy. I know it's a big ask, but it is something that we really want to work towards, you know, to changing the policy around no recourse to public funds, and the 1.7 million people that are affected by it, and 170,000 children. So there's a lot of organisations that are involved in this now, and I'm so grateful for their involvement. And you talk about at universities and colleges, I've been contacted by universities like Goldsmiths, Bristol, London School of Economics, Wolverhampton University. So I'll be going into universities and speaking with students about this subject. And I'm just so grateful, really, that it's had the response that it's had. And I just hope that this film can just ignite those conversations where people come together, you know, and try and support each other and support the people that are going through this horrific pain. because of these very cruel policies. And that's really my aim as the filmmaker, is to really get this film out there.
Also, I just wanted to say, anybody listening, that if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. But Sonita, I just wanted to say, and I don't know if everybody watching this realizes this, but this is your debut film as a director. And I, being a director myself, I just take my hat off to you to have done something so ambitious and so, you know, heartrending and important, exposing something so cruel. I think that's, you know, it's a huge amount to take on. What for you, as you know, as a beginner, I mean, not in you are a producer, but you know, it is a different role. What was the most challenging thing for you in and you know, in practical terms as well? I mean, you were filming during COVID, right in the middle of lockdown. I know you started in lockdown. What were the most challenging things, and what do you think you've really learned as a director from this experience? And do you want to do it again?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of challenges. You know, I look back on those early days and think, wow, this is tough. This is really tough. I mean, first of all, as you say, filming in a global pandemic, my first concern were the crew and making sure that they were safe. And I got COVID right at the beginning in my prep, actually. I hadn't met any of the participants at that time. So to begin with, I got COVID. I then broke my ankle. So whilst I was doing my prep, I was out for 8 weeks. So first of all, I had to do a lot of the work via UGC. So I was collecting user-generated content. I was getting to know participants from home, really, and they were sending me footage on their phones, and I was watching it and getting to know them. And so that was really great to kind of build my story whilst recovering from a broken ankle. Then when we did start shooting, my immediate concern were my crew. So learning about COVID protocols, what we need to adhere to on set. And then I'd never directed before. So then I had to learn about cameras. I had to learn about, you know, story, crafting a story, putting a crew together, what crew I needed, how many I needed. And then I had to work on sort of production management and getting out call sheets and making sure that people were on set on time and making sure that we were, you know, adhering to rules on set, but also taking care of our participants. And then when I started interviewing, I then had to formulate my questions. So as I was filming, I was researching, and then I was putting questions together in subjects that I was just not familiar with. So there was a lot of learning that went on also. So I guess it was technical, it was story crafting, it was managing a crew and understanding global pandemic protocols. And at the same time, we couldn't raise any money for the film. So all of this was happening. Meanwhile, I'd reached out to some funding bodies and I couldn't get any money. And I think it's because I was a debut director, and also probably the story wasn't as it wasn't as fleshed out in those early days. You know, I was making a story about migrant communities, but why and what was the film? And I guess not being able to access funding was just another layer of stress. So we had to do it really guerrilla style, and I didn't get paid. You know, a lot of the people within my immediate team took pay cuts. They wanted to do the film, and even the crew, you know, they did the film for sometimes less than what they normally get paid. So I was really grateful to them to take this film on. And so, you know, that was another challenge, not having any money to make the film. So as we were filming, I then was able to bring on board 2 financiers. But with that came another layer of, you know, a little bit of stress, because then you have to stick to a very tight budget. You have to manage the money really closely. And then you have to make sure that you are responsible for every penny spent. And it was great in one way, because it taught me a lot in this really, you know, crazy time of so much uncertainty. And I learned a lot, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. And it's been an awful time for so many people. And to be able to direct my debut film in this most dreadful time, for me, it's been an absolute privilege. And I'm just so grateful to my team, to my crew, to the participants, to my friends, to my family, to everybody that supported me on this journey, because you cannot do these things on your own. And to answer your next question, I would love to do this again. You know, even though it's to the end of my ends, but I would love to do this again. I would love to do it again because I've learned so much, and learning this is a real privilege to me, because I would never have been able to learn this, because I would never have directed my film had it not been for the pandemic. So I've now learned the process of filmmaking and prep and production and post-production was a huge learning curve for me, and I loved every minute of it, and the edit. So I feel like I'm now ready for my next film. But I know I've got so much more to learn and so much more to give. I feel like Hostile was a starting point for me, and I feel like there is so much more that I can give in my storytelling, for sure. And I would really love the opportunity to be able to direct again, more than anything. I really would.
And have you got any ideas about the kind of thing that you would like to direct next?
Yes. I'm getting quite excited about what I'd like to do next, because it kind of takes Hostile to another level. It's again a film that is about, it's about systems. The hostile was about the hostile environment, and the next film is about the infrastructure that creates the hostile environment, the systems that create not just the hostile environment, but all crises and environments that we're all subjected to. And so I've already connected with the three major participants that I'd like to interview. One has said yes, the other two are thinking about it, but I've secured one, and he was probably, the person that I really needed to get first. So my entry will be to start shooting the interviews, get my story down in terms of the participants, in terms of the interviewees, and then start shooting my actuality and weave in the archive again. So it's a contemporary story, but it's also a contemporary story that has a relevance to the past, to the present, and very much to the future. So I will also be making my sort of assumptions of where we're heading. And yeah, I'm really excited about it, because it's something that was bothering me whilst making Hostile, and something that was at the forefront of my mind. And I thought, I've got to make this. The other film idea I have is relatable to my own history as a child. And I started gathering that information, for years, and not knowing that one day I would be using it in a film. So I'm going to be using that in another film. So yeah, I have just two ideas, but I would really like to. I'd like
Your
to.
career is still
Yeah.
very pure. I think making films is hard, right? And but as you say, what was such a privilege. And I just I think we've got time for another question or two, but just to go back to your mom, actually, that very moving interview with her in the film, that wasn't actually filmed during the process of making this film. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So my mom, unfortunately, she started to have early stages of dementia around 2012, 2013. And at that point, my mom was living in the West Midlands, in my hometown where I grew up. And she had visited London, a couple of years. She was always in London visiting me, but a couple of years later, she was in London, and that week she had got lost where I live in London, and the police came to the door, and they knocked on the door, and they said that, your mom had got lost. And I was like, wow. And then I realized that her dementia was getting worse. And we had spoken a lot about her history and her childhood, and some of her history I've got on dictaphone, and I'd recorded conversations. And I said to her, I asked her, Mom, I really think that we should do an interview, because I think this would be really important for us to have, for me to have, and us to have as a family, to look back on what you went through. And she was really reluctant to do it to begin with, but then she realized that actually this would be a good thing to do. So it was a really emotional day shooting that interview, and it took a few hours, because there were a lot of tears in between getting that interview down.
Yeah.
And then I just kept that interview. And unfortunately, my mom's dementia got worse a few years ago. I moved her to London. I then became her caregiver. And then she lived not far from me with care. And I myself and my family took care of my mom. My mom's interview went into the film, and unfortunately my mom passed away during post-production. So as I'm doing my post and I'm putting my mom's interview into the film, my mom passed away. And that was really tough to do the edit and to do the post and have my mom in that. It was just really hard. But I'm so I'm so grateful to her for everything, and I loved her immensely. She is my inspiration, and I'm glad that she's in the film, really. And it was a really important time for me to put her in the film.
It feels to me in some ways like she's maybe subconsciously, and I obviously don't want to put words in your mouth, but it feels like she's the spark, for this. There's a question that's just come in that is a really interesting question, so I'm just going to read it to you. And I don't know who this is from, but thank you. I'm really impressed. So there you go. As someone who's been working with refugees and asylum seekers for 20 years and using devious channels to reach the unpersuaded, how do you plan to get to the people outside of the choir? I mean, you've already talked about Parliament and people on both sides, effectively.
Yeah.
The Daily Mail readers, the Britain First members, people like that who are not going to agree with you, and people who might just think that this film is just a bunch of lies or whatever. How you'll go to the cinema and watch this film, and that's really important. But how are you going to get it to the people who are going to be possibly hostile to the things that you have to say?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question. Actually, I want to go to Hartlepool and areas like that, and back to my hometown in Wolverhampton that was pro-Brexit. I'm going to be going into those communities and having sort of community, community screenings, community-based screenings. And I intend to go into those areas where there is going to be that level of hostility around this film, and that level of, well, not that we don't care. I mean, I think a lot of it is because people are unfamiliar with what's actually really going on. They read the press, they see the news, they see one side of the story, they don't see the other side of the story. So there's a great unfamiliarity with this story. And I feel like I need to go into those communities where there is that unfamiliarity and to talk to those people. And the thing is, I grew up in a community which was white, working class, Black and brown communities. I was exposed to racism as a child. The National Front were in my area, and I used to talk to them as a child. I used to talk to them because I wanted to understand why they felt that level of hostility towards me. And so I feel, for hostile, that great sense of urgency on my part to go into those communities and to reach out to those communities and speak to people about this. So that is my plan, is to go into those communities where they're unfamiliar with this narrative, and to show them a story about the lives of individuals that they may not necessarily meet or come across, and see what they think once they watch the film. So that is my aim, is to go into those communities, 100%.
Right. And just finally, you know, now that you've mentioned the B word, you know, I think these things, I mean, you know, we're not going to get into that, but you know, there are links, as you say in the film. So those people in towns where, you know, that have held those views and continue to hold those views, if they get to see your film, what is the one thing you'd like them to take away from your film? If you manage to do that, which sounds like you are going to manage to do it. You know, what do you want them to take away?
Just to have that level of empathy and understanding, and to know that actually Britain is a country, we are a society that are inclusive. We have more in common than we don't. We have more similarities than we do differences. And I want people to feel that when they watch this film, that, you know, let's fight this together, you know, and let's change things together. Let's be part of that positive change. Let's set our differences aside and let's focus on our similarities. Because as a child, that's what I did when I was faced with racism, when I was faced with people that didn't necessarily understand who I was, why I was here. And I just got onto their level and talked to them, and they got onto my level and talked to me. And then somehow we found a common ground. And I just want that for this film, to bring communities together that wouldn't necessarily be brought together. And that's my hope and desire, not just around this film, but for society in general. You know, let's just set our differences aside and let's just focus on our similarities, and let's drive forward with more of a positive society that's welcoming and that has empathy, love for each other. And that's my goal and that's my aim.
And maybe as a little child, you didn't realize that, you know, that was that courage that you showed in talking to people who, you know, dissed you, would end up in a film like this. So thank you, Sonita, for making this film. It broke my heart. It's made me angry. But now actually I've gone on a bit of journey, you know, just even talking to you, and realized that, you know, we are, as a society, actually, we always were inclusive. You know, it's not our natural thing to be divisive in this sense. And, you know, thank you for making a film that's going to make us think about these things and hopefully, you know, give us some optimism for change as well as breaking our hearts.
Oh,
so thank you.
Very much.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.